we go. Argument for God's existence, part 2. We're going to talk about morality. Let me ask you a question. Can we be good without God? Yes or no?
No.
Yeah. Yes.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
By whose standards?
well, then when we get into objectivity, which we're going to get into a little bit. Or what about a different question? Does good even exist? Yes, sir.
You mean good, like good without being a Christian?
Good question. Exactly the point. That's exactly the point.
I mean, when you said without God, I don't know if you meant like.
Well, just like that, at face.
God being existing, or
right, at face value, could we be good without God? Now, what people usually assume that to be is exactly what he said. Could I be good without belief in God? And the answer to that is clearly, yeah. You can be good without believing in God, but that wasn't the question.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Right. The question is literally, can you be good without God? Well, you would have to ask a second question: does good even exist without God?
What is good? What is good?
Right, or you didn't have to define it. And even in the first place, just say, does good even exist if there is no God? So, let's get into the moral argument. It goes like this. 2 premises to a conclusion. First one, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2, objective moral values and duties do exist. Conclusion, therefore God exists. Let's unpack this. We'll follow here in the notes. This is to say that for morality, that is good and evil, right or wrong, to even exist, there must be something outside of the human mind to ground them in. To have objective morality is to say that something is right or wrong no matter what someone thought about it. So like someone said earlier, it doesn't matter who you ask or whose perspective is it. Good and evil is independent of our thoughts. For example, if everyone believed slavery was okay, would it still be wrong? If morality is objective, which means it's not based on people's opinions, then it would still be wrong. But if morality is subjective, which means it is dependent on people's opinions, then it would depend on what the person doing thought about it. So if God does not exist, then it follows that morality is just a human convention, thus subjective and not binding. But if morality is to be objective, that means independent of human thought, then it must exist outside of the human mind in something eternal and necessary. Now, we just went over arguments for God's eternality and His necessariness, His necessary existence. So if morality exists, it can't exist or be based on the human mind. Why? Because we weren't always here. So 2 plus 2 equals 4 exists even before we existed. Right? Or rather, it's true, right? So, if something exists, it has to exist in something that is eternal and that never began, because if it is necessarily true, it can't begin to be true. Therefore, morality cannot be based on the human mind. Therefore, it has to be outside of the human mind in something necessary. What can we ground it in? God. Now, note that we are not saying, in this argument, we are not saying that atheists are immoral people. We're not saying that, and I would never espouse that. But rather that without God, morality does not even exist. There is no good or bad. Why? Because if there is no God, then morality is dependent on the human, and the human mind has not always existed, and is therefore contingent, subjective, and non-binding. So without God, there can be no such thing as morality. Let's talk about this. Objective is something that is valid and binding, independent of human thought. Something that is subjective is based on human opinion and perspective. Chocolate ice cream is the best is a what? Subjective claim. 2 and 2 is 4 is an objective claim. It's not based on the subject, it's based on the object. So, if there is no God, it follows that good and evil is just someone's opinion. It's someone's preference. So again, if there's no such thing as good and evil, right or wrong, there must be, if there is, there must be something independent of the human mind. Again, what we're not saying in this argument, let's go over this for a second, because what you'll usually hear people and atheists saying in this argument, they'll automatically jump to, well, I don't need God to be good. I don't need God, I don't need to believe in God to be a good person. I give to charity, I help orphanages, I help the homeless. And I said, look, that's not what I'm arguing here. What we are not saying in this argument. We are not saying that one must believe in God to live moral lives. We're not saying that. What we are saying is that without God, objective morality does not exist. So, let's go to misconceptions to get deeper into the argument. Misconceptions of premise 1, which is the first statement. Some people might say, well, we don't need God to know that something is wrong. I would agree with them. I would say, first of all, we need to differentiate between moral knowledge and moral grounding. If you want big words, it is moral ontology and moral epistemology. Now, we already know what is epistemology. It's what? It has to do with... Yes. Has to do with what?
Study of knowledge.
Knowledge, good. So epistemology is the knowing of something. So moral epistemology is how we come to know morality. Moral ontology is the grounding for which morality exists. In other words, where it exists in. And we already said that if morality exists, it has to exist in something that is eternal. Humans are not eternal, therefore morality cannot be based on us. So, the ontology of morality, or the grounding of morality, has to exist in something outside of us. So first of all, knowledge deals with how we come to know morality, whereas the grounding, ontology, has to do with why it exists in the first place. So the argument is an argument for the grounding of morality, irrelevant to the knowledge of morality. We are not asking, do we need God to know morality, but rather, does good and evil exist if there is no God? So let's reflect on this. If there's no God, why is murder wrong? If there's no God, everything that someone would consider bad or evil, good or right, is just someone's preference. For example, I love Taco Bell. You might not, right? If you go to Burger King instead of Taco Bell, are you doing something evil? No. Who here likes to eat peas? What do you eat them with? As far as silverware?
Spoon.
Fork? Who said spoon? So we have fork and spoon. Who's evil and who's not evil? What's the preference, right? What if I said I eat peas with a knife? Am I doing something wrong? Now you might say, well, if you have a purpose, eat more peas, then yeah, the knife isn't the best way to go about, maybe the spoon. But the point is, if there is no God, evil is just your preference and opinion. You like to murder? Cool, I don't. At least not on Saturdays. Oh, you like peas? You eat them with a fork? Cool. What do you eat them with? Spoon? Nice. You think murder is not good? That's alright. I mean, that's just you. I mean, me, I'm alright with it. Child abuse? It depends. Flip a coin. And you might think, well, that's wrong. Well, that's wrong to you, right? Just like you eat peas with a fork. So if there's no God, morality is just someone's opinion. It is based on the human mind. And I had people tell me, well, what else could it be based in? It has to be based in a mind. I said, I agree with you. God's mind. Therefore, it's eternal and binding and objective, and it doesn't matter what I think about it. So if morality exists, it has to be objective. And even if everybody in the world thought it was okay to kill Jews, would it be okay? No. Why? Because morality is not dependent on the human mind. You with me? But if there is no God, then sure, it's dependent on whatever you think and whoever you ask. Example number 2. An objection would be, we know where morality came from. It evolved over time, therefore we don't need God or the Bible for it. I've heard this too. My philosophy professor that I debated, he said, oh, I know where morality comes from, it evolved. I can even give you a story of how it could possibly evolve. Well, again, even if that were true, was this discovered or invented by social conditioning? Because if this was just a contingent standard based on the tribe alone, then it's possible that if you were stronger and bigger than everyone, you didn't have to follow that rule. So for example, here's what he said. And the blank there would be, you wouldn't have to follow that rule. He said, take an example. Let's say there's a caveman as we're evolving. One guy steals mammoth meat from the other, and the guy who stole the meat went to his friends and said, this guy's stealing meat. If we don't stop him, he's going to steal meat from everybody, and he's going to, make us starve. What should we do? Let's kill him. So the whole tribe kills this one guy, and then makes an example out of him, and now everybody knows if we want to get along better, we don't steal meat from each other. Therefore, thou shalt not steal meat. Thus, boom, morality. Well, here's the problem with that. First of all, it's committing the error of what? We just talked about it. You're giving me an example of how we came to know morality, not why it exists. You're giving me an epistemological stance on morality, not an ontological stance. You're telling me how you came to know morality, not why it exists. Are you with me on that? Secondly, if it is truly, if that's where we got it from, did we invent that because it happened to fit our standard? Or did we discover that we shouldn't steal? Because if you discover it, then it's not based on you, because you don't invent truth, you discover it. But if you invent it, then it's just arbitrary, which means it's just your opinion based on that tribe. Because let's say this guy who stole the meat, they try to kill him, and let's say he kills everybody else. And he's like, man, I'm stronger than everybody. Hey, you know what? I'm going to steal meat, and no one's going to stop me. Therefore, in his mind, it's morally okay to steal meat because no one can do anything about it. Is he right or wrong? Well, it's his opinion. Secondly, no educated Christian believes that the reason morality exists is because the Bible says so. We already went over this. The Bible doesn't invent truth, it conveys truth. The Bible doesn't make up truth, it conveys truth. Much like a calculator doesn't make up 4 as the answer for 2 plus 2, it conveys it because it's the truth. Okay. And again, even if that were true, morality, that would be one way we come to know morality, not why it exists. The question of the argument is based on the existence of morality, not how we come to know morality. Example 3. Science can show us what is good for the flourishing of human beings. This is usually what I get. Because then they'll say, well, you have to define what's good. And I'll say, well, that even if we did define it, that wouldn't show where it came from. That's semantical morality. That's semantics morality. The response is this. Even if this is possible, it is presupposing what it is trying to prove. What fallacy is that? Assuming what you're trying to prove. You can look at your notes. There's a few fallacies.
Logical?
It is a logical fallacy. It is begging the question, because first of all, you're assuming that morality is the flourishing of human beings. You're saying, what is good? The flourishing of human beings. Why is the flourishing of human beings good? Because it's good. It's also tautology, and it's begging the question. It's a false presupposition. The statement is essentially saying that the flourishing of human beings is good, therefore the good exists because this is good. It presupposes what good is. Now, it's trying to define good, and based on definition, saying therefore it exists. However, this is to commit the logical fallacy of speciesism. This has not proved anything. It is committing the logical fallacy of speciesism. What is speciesism? It is a logical fallacy of having an unjustified bias towards your own species, kind of like racism, but towards a certain species. So, if an atheist were to tell me, and they usually do go with this, they say, well, I'll tell you what's good. Good exists. Good is whatever is best for human beings. And I'll say, well, first of all, time out. You're telling me, again, knowledge of morality, epistemology of morality, not why it exists. The question is why it exists. But let's humor you, Mr. Atheist, for a second. You're saying good is defined as whatever is best for human beings. I said, that's racist. Well, technically, it's specious. You're being it's speciesism. What is that? You have a bias towards humans. Why should we do what's best for humans? Why not do what's best for corn? I like corn better than some people. Let's kill some people and make more room for corn. What makes human beings special? Why is that species favored among the rest? Why not? If there's no God, human beings are just as important as a swarm of mosquitoes. And you don't hesitate to kill mosquitoes. So what makes human beings special? You're being a speciesist. You're having, it's like racism towards species. Now, what some people might say is, well, the reason we should do what's best for human beings is because human beings have a better conscience than any other animal. Huh. Well, what makes you think that's special? Who came up with that? A human being. Well, that's kind of racist. You're still being a species. Why should we make human beings the favored species? Well, because human beings can take care of the earth. Okay, again, what makes the earth special? Well, because it provides for us. What makes us special? Because we can take care of the earth. Point is, no matter what they say, it's your opinion. You're being arbitrary. Who cares about humans? Peter Singer, he was rated #1 out of the top 50 influential atheists of the world a year or two ago. says that he thinks it's perfectly fine to not just have abortions, but to kill a baby even 30 days after it's born, in case you want to decide whether or not to keep it. Also said, he said, you know, what's amazing is we give rights to humans that we don't give to animals. He said a baby at a certain weeks old is not as smart as a pig. Singer, are you literally implying that a pig has more value than a baby at like 2 weeks? And he goes, but we'll kill the pig and we won't kill it, but we won't kill the baby? He's like, what's up with that? Really? I've heard him go as far as to say, children, cover your ears if there's any. He says he thinks cross-species relations is okay. He says that if a dog owner wants to allow the dog to perform certain duties on him, as long as he's not being overbearing on the dog and the dog's okay with it, the dog thinks he's doing something good for his owner, the owner's getting satisfaction, he goes, who cares? Google it. It's on video. Peter Singer, Bestiality. And he's on a talk show, and some people are like, what? And he's like, yeah, why is it taboo? What's up with that? He goes, what? He goes, I wrote an article about it. He goes, and then I had these therapists come up to me and say, thank you so much for your article. I've had a lot of patients come in who struggle with this, and when I showed them the article, they felt so much better. Oh, good for them. If there's no God, who cares what human beings, who cares that we should survive? What makes us special? We're not the strongest animal. We're not the fastest animal. Some of us aren't the brightest animal. We're not the tallest. Oh, but we can think better. Well, that's arbitrary. Who came up with that? You. You're a human. Very convenient, isn't it? So again, to say that we should do what's best for the human race is good is presupposing what good is, and at best it's a tautology that we should do good because this is good. This still does not answer the question of the existence of morality, but merely asserts what good is and then says, therefore it is good. Now, other people might say, science. We can know through science what morality is. Remember, we've already talked about this. Morality is not something that can be studied by science. It is a metaphysical question of the ontology of morality, the grounding of morality. Morality is not something physical. You can't find moral values in a test tube. I already told you about the poison in the water. We can look through a microscope, how the water's poisoned, how it affected the body, but you can't look at a microscope and say, oh, and it's wrong. This is not a scientific question. Now, if you want to say, well, good is what's best for human beings, then you can scientifically study what's good for a human being, but you are presupposing that good is defined by what's best for humans. What if I said morality is what's best for corn? Then I could scientifically discover through agriculture how to plant the best corn. But I'm assuming what is good before I start to assert what good is. Are you with me? Okay. Let's go to another objection to premise one. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Questions so far? We good? Okay. Here's a dilemma. It's called the Euthyphro dilemma. And it says, is something good because God wills it? Or does God will it because it's good? If you say something is good because God wills it, then the good becomes arbitrary and subjective. Arbitrary means it's based on the person, on the opinion. God could will that murder or hate is good, but that's absurd. But if you say that God wills something because it is good, then even God himself has to abide by a standard of good that is independent of him. So why do we need God for it? It's superfluous, which means it's unnecessary. It's too much. So what do we do with this? Oh, you think God is a standard of the ontological reason for morality existing? Well, why is that? Does God say something because it's good, or something good because God says it? If it's good because God says it, then he can say whatever he wants and it's good. Or is it good because there's a standard outside of God that even he has to obey? If that's true, then we don't need God for it. Thus you have a dichotomy. Which one is it? Because whichever you pick, you're going to lose. Response, it's a false dichotomy. It's like asking, have you stopped beating your wife? Because you're assuming there's only two options. There's a third option, and you can just go to the notes later if I pass one up. And it's basically that God is the good. He is the standard of good. I heard a William Lane Craig use the analogy. For example, the standard for which an audio recording sounds like a live orchestra, it has that kind of sound and crispness to it, and it's a good recording. But what makes a live orchestra sound like a good record? What makes a good recording sound like a live orchestra? You know, the fact that, you know, you can hear each instrument and whatnot. But what makes a live orchestra good? Well, nothing. It's just that's the standard by which everything else is judged, by which recording is judged. So God is the good, and it's not as if he has to compare to good, it's that he is the good. It's kind of like asking, what makes water wet? Is it wet because of the wetness, or is it wet because it's water? Well, it just is part of the water. It's an essential property. So the concept of God is that he is the moral apex, the good, the most possibly loving good being that could exist. And in order for morality to exist, it has to exist outside of me and you, and it has to be in something eternal and necessary. The only thing that would fit that, God. Questions or comments? I know it's a lot to take in. The atheist position would be nihilism, which is the atheist position that many atheist philosophers and scholars have come to see, that is the view that since there is no God, there is no such thing as morality. Let me read one quote from a gentleman. His name is William Provine. He's a professor of biology at Cornell University. Here's what he said. He said, "Let me summarize my views of what modern evolution tells us loud and clear. There are no gods or God or purposes. There are no goal-directed forces of any kind. There is no life after death. When I die, I'm certain that's going to be the end of me. There is no ultimate foundation for ethics. There's no ultimate meaning for life, and there's no ultimate free will for human beings either." That is truly the atheist view. Now, if an atheist disagrees with him, I would have to say why. There's a, you know, so you think objective morality exists? Usually they'll say yes. Why? Because it's good for humans. Nope, speciesism. Why? Well, because I believe it. Well, that's your opinion, so it's not objective. It's subjective. Why? And just as the argument goes, if there's no God, you cannot have objective morality. All right, the last one for this argument, and then we'll go into one more argument. People usually say, let me just kind of go through this because it's going to be a lot to talk about, and I'll give you the notes later. You can copy. And for the sake of time, let's just kind of dialogue about it. Usually natives would say that not everything is right or wrong, black or white. Cultures differ in what's right or wrong. What works for them may not work for us. Therefore, morality is subjective. For example, who here would kill someone? Okay.
Self-defense.
Self-defense, okay. So is killing someone always wrong? No.
No.
Okay.
Not according to our culture.
Not according to our culture, okay. Who here would stab a baby with a metal object? Okay. Who here would do it if it meant saving the baby's life and it's an injection, it's a shot, and that metal object has medicine in it? Who would do it? Sure, right? Different scenario. So what they say is that, look, since each scenario is different, there is no absolute right or wrong. So there is no objective morality. It depends on who you ask or the situation. In fact, there are some actions that are not right or wrong in and of themselves. The motive will often make a difference. But this does not mean that morality is subjective, because the underlying principle is that there would still be an objective right or wrong, value or duty or action depending on the motive. Okay. Response. Just because there are rare occasions that moral values seem to be at conflict with one another does not show that there is no objective morality. But it in fact shows that there is only a conflict because objective morality exists. Someone once told me, well, a lot of it's gray. I said, well, the only reason it's gray is because there is a black and white. If there's no black and white, there can be no gray. Point in case. It is true that it does seem that there are some times where moral values do seem to kind of conflict against each other. I'll admit that. An atheist will say, well, therefore, or even some Christians say, therefore, there is no absolute right or wrong. However, I would say that there is an absolute right or wrong, and what the Bible would tell us is that you go for the weightier one, the heavier one. You read in the Bible where the spy Rahab lies to people, and God's people are saved through a lie. Is lying okay? Is lying a sin?
Yes.
Yes. Did she lie?
Yes.
Yes. Why did she lie?
To save life.
To save life.
Lives.
Is there a moral conflict? Yes. Which is a heavier one? Tell a lie or let life created in the image of God go? Are you with me here? you go for the weightier principle. And God honors the fact that you are still obeying the objective moral standard. It doesn't mean that lying is now okay for 30 minutes. Everybody lie as much as you want, kind of like a purge. It means, no, you went for the moral weightier principle. Here's an example I love to use. Stop recording here. No, I'm just joking. Zombie apocalypse. Right? I know, I watched so much Walking Dead. Let's say you had a son or daughter at home, and they were dying of something. They had asthma. Something was going on where they needed medicine within 30 minutes. You say, okay, there's medicine. There's a medical shop 10 blocks from there. She needs it in 30 minutes. I'm going to run and be quiet. You open the door, you see a horde of zombies. You try to be quiet as best you can. You grab the medicine, you got it. There's a horde of zombies, so you got to take the back road. As you jump over the fence, you slip, and let's say you fall on your ankle and the bone breaks, and you have the bone sticking out. Right? Typical Walking Dead scenario. Now, you yell, the zombies hear you, they're slowly coming towards you. Lo and behold, you turn to the side, and right by you is a bag of cocaine, meth, something, acid, whatever. You have a choice. What do? You take the drugs, blocks the pain for enough time to get to your son or daughter and give them the medicine to save their life, or you say, no, I'm a Christian, I don't do drugs, and let the zombies eat you, and your daughter, son or daughter dies too. What do? Who would take the drugs? Raise your hand. Who would not take it? Now, I missed the opportunity because usually before the scenario, I always ask who here would do drugs just for heck of it. But you get the point. Now, does that mean if they're okay for 30 minutes, I can do all the drugs I want? No. What's the purpose and point? Is there a moral conflict? Absolutely. Absolutely. Are we now condoning doing drugs? No. However, to save a life, I am willing to go for the weightier principle. Yes, I'm a Christian. No, I don't do drugs. But however, if it means saving a life, I'm going to do it. Then you have a difference of motive. For example, if someone said, Jesus went to the cross willingly, right? I said, yeah. He goes, he committed suicide. I go, no, he didn't. That's called a sacrifice. Because the motive is different. It's a sacrifice, not a suicide. If I jump in the way of a bullet to save my wife, I'm not committing suicide. Even though I am willingly putting myself to death, I am making a sacrifice. Which the Bible says no one has any greater love than that. So it all depends on the motive. Is it a conflict? Absolutely. Absolutely. However, it's only a conflict because there is an objective right and wrong. So don't let them say, well, in some scenarios it would be okay. You may be right, but that doesn't mean that all things being equal, there are some things that are absolutely wrong and right. For example, is it ever okay to torture a baby for fun? Absolutely not. No matter what scenario there is. No. Now, is it okay in some scenarios to maybe lie to save a life? Sure. Does that mean lying is now okay? No. Are you with me here? Questions or comments on that?